I call to order the January 3rd, 2022, 6 p.m. Public Tax Budget Hearing Meeting of the Cincinnati Board of Education. We welcome everyone and request everyone in the audience to please silence your cell phones and electronic devices. I neglected to mention that in accordance with board protocol, I will begin the meeting as President Pro Temp until the election of a president takes place at the next meeting, which will be our organizational meeting. So I will serve in the president's role for this meeting. Okay, Mr. Lindy, would you please lead us in the pledge? Thank you. Ms. Wagner, please call the roll.
Ms. Bolton? Present. Mr. Craig?
Here.
Mr. Lindy?
Here.
Dr. Moffitt? Here. Mr. Morosky?
Here.
Mrs. Weinberg?
Present.
President Jones?
Here. Okay, members of the public who wish to speak for the tax budget hearing may do so by clicking the chat button now. The chat feature will be open for your requests for 5 minutes. Please submit your name, your affiliation to the district, your school community, your topic, and your contact information if you want a direct response to any questions you might have. I'll now invite Ms. Wagner to introduce our speaker, our presenter for the day.
Yes, I'd like to invite Kevin Ashley up, who's our Director of Financial Reporting Transparency. He's responsible for developing the tax budget. This is an annual requirement, and that we do that in a public hearing. And I'll let Kevin explain why it's important for us to do this.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Today. Good to see everybody. So I'm going to go through just quickly this PowerPoint presentation, but you have the more detailed tax budget report there as well. So the first slide talks about the purpose of the tax budget. It's an annual requirement that comes from the Ohio Revised Code. The format that we use conforms with reporting requirements that are provided by the Hamilton County Auditor. We do what's called a modified tax budget, and they allow that, and we follow that format. School districts must prepare a tax budget each January, provide a basis for the Hamilton County Commission's review of the next calendar year's local tax revenue rates and millage. The tax budget covers the general fund and the debt service bond retirement fund. That's where we actually receive tax revenues from the county. The next slide, the next one has the debt summary. So this is kind of a high-level review of grouping all of our debt issues and outstanding debt issues that we have. Since we're looking at the tax budget on a calendar year, you'll notice in the far right column it says outstanding balance at 1/1/23. So that's the period that the tax budget's going to cover. Under type, where it says voted, those issues tie back to the voted bond levy, going back to when the district did the facility master plan. Originally, the original issuance was around $480 million, and where it sits now is about $212 million when we get to 23. The next three categories under unvoted, these are different issues. The QSCUB stands for Qualified School Construction Bonds that were issued back in 2010, 11, and 12. It covered building energy projects for 40 facilities of the district. The repayment of that is primarily from the general fund, and those combined outstanding were about $50 million in 23. The next category were originally issued back in 2002. There's been some refunding of that, and that's why they're 2018. But all of the underlying work related to 15 school improvement projects, soon after 2002. And the balance there is $55.7 million. The next category is certificates of participation that were issued in 2018. Those work like, they're not bonds. They work more like a lease purchase agreement in order for us to acquire facilities or improve facilities. And so that was used for acquiring the Mercy property and the Clifton area neighborhood schools improvement projects. That's also to be paid back through the general fund. At the end of at 1/1/23, the balance will be approximately $18 million. The last category is also unvoted. And this is a series of certificates of participation as well that were issued in 2014, 2015, and then there were some issues refunded in 2021. The original use of those were for building improvements. They were set up as part of the Great American Ballpark Stadium agreement through agreements with the county. We received contributions from the county annually to help pay that debt. And until a couple years ago, we also received money from the city as part of that as well. And then that gives you a combined total there of all the issues of about $430 million. The next slide, just a couple specifics to point out on the tax budget, which I kind of mentioned already. The tax budget's on a calendar year since our levies are based on the calendar year. You'll recall we did, the board approves a 5-year forecast twice a year in May and November. That is going to be on a fiscal year from July 1 to June 30th. So there is some breaking it down so that we match up based on the calendar year. The other thing, since we did the November forecast, the county has provided updated property values, which we went through the triennial update last year. This year it was much smaller updates, I think around 2%. And then they also look at our tax rates, and that's something they'll finalize as part of the tax budget process once it gets to them. The bond fund, again, receives tax revenue, and then we get refunds from the state for homestead and rollback exemptions. So the next slide, the big question we want to make sure when we're reviewing this is, do our estimated revenues cover the debt obligations for those calendar years? So we have calendar year 22, calendar year 23, and you can see our revenues are a little bit higher in the voted debt. So that's a good thing. Then they're going to levy tax. They're going to make sure that the rates match up so that there's enough money to cover those obligations. The next slide is the unvoted debt. This is the stuff related to the general fund, the stadium fund. As part of the tax budget, we're not required to review those and submit those, but as part of transparency for the board and the public, the district has chosen to present those just so that it's an annual checkup of where those are at. And you'll see here, we kind of asked the same question. We identified the revenues as well as the expenditures. And just to point out, the revenues here relate to the county contributions. We also have federal interest subsidies on some of those issues where we get money from the federal government. We get interest revenue. And then at the end, we do a transfer from the general fund to cover what other items are left. We talked a little bit, I looked at my notes from last year, we talked a little bit about fixed sum levies. And so even though the values do go up, the levy is designed to only generate a certain dollar amount, so the burden then gets shifted out to all the property owners. So I know one of the things we talked about last year was, rates went up, we're going to get more tax revenue. It doesn't always work that way, particularly for those fixed sum levies. I think that's all I have. Do you have any questions, or if Jen would like to add anything?
Okay, so you'll adopt the budget as required by law, that in the next meeting, after everybody's sworn in and officially vote, and you'll adopt it through a resolution. So we'll explain that again in public in the next meeting. But this is a requirement, and then we'll be happy to answer any questions that you have. and then if there's anybody from the public that wanted to speak.
Okay, so before we go to hearing of the public, I'm going to ask board members if you have any questions or comments. Ms. Bolton.
Yes, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Ashley. See you in the new year. This is for either you or the treasurer, and you kind of address it when you show that annually there's enough money for we can go ahead because it matches and there's enough revenue to cover what the debt would cost. But I know there's also some sort of, not formula, but there's some sort of common wisdom and probably some sort of legal requirement. What's the recommended amount of debt a school district should cover? I'm not in dollar amount, of course, but in percentage, or how does that play out if either of you could kind of help us with that?
It's a simple question with a very complex answer. And so we have debt limitations that are defined for us. And it's a very complicated formula that our debt counsel usually does for us. I don't know if you want to add any more detail to that without going into.
Yeah, so one other kind of unique thing with Cincinnati Public Schools is back when the facility master plan was done, there was actually legislation that allowed the district to exceed that limit. And so we're still, exceeding that limit along with that exemption. I think it's like 2% of the value of all the property in the district is one of the limits that they use.
But not every debt instrument qualifies under that formula. So like I said, it's a very complicated answer, and we can certainly walk you through it maybe at a finance committee meeting. But we are over our debt limitation.
Yes, and I think that's important for us to note. I mean, it's been for good cause, and like you said, the state legislature actually did something for us regarding the facilities master plan and whatever. So just as we continue, we have to be watching that, as well as remembering that we have a renewal, which is nothing about the debt, but a renewal that's coming in November. So we're in a renewal year this year, which will.
Another thing I wanted to mention
yes,
too, for instance, the certificates of participation do not go against the debt limit. Also, you can exceed the debt limit with a vote sometimes. So if it's a voted levy, I think in some cases that can exceed as well. So like she said, it's very complicated. And that's one reason we use legal counsel and bond counsel for those types of things as well.
Thank you.
Additional comments or questions? Okay, thank you. I just wanted to mention to the board that if we have to approve the budget, and so there was a resolution on the agenda. However, we are going to defer that and add it to our organizational meeting because our new members haven't been sworn in yet. So we want you to be legal when you vote. So we deferred it, but we will do that tonight. So now we are at the item on the agenda for hearing the public. Do we have any public comment? No public comment? Wow. Shall I? Gosh, it's only 6:14. How about that? Okay. Well, having no further comment, I think this particular meeting is over. So having no further business before us, I declare this meeting adjourned. We will start promptly at 6:30 with the organizational meeting.